Perfect. And everyone moved over, so we're all set.
Okay, we can begin then. Welcome everybody to the June 14th Sandag EMP Working Group meeting. Before we jump into the meeting, I'll ask our group leader, Kim, to confirm whether we have a quorum today. Kim?
Yes, we do have quorum. Thank you, everyone.
Great. Oh, we have a commitment to discuss, I guess, at some point. I'd like to remind members and the public on the process for both members and public comments. The primary members will be using their cameras and we will take live public comments. Members are asked to turn their cameras on or raise their hands when they have a comment or question, and then we'll recognize you to speak. Kim will now provide a quick reminder on how the public comments will work.
So in addition to the email comments, the public may also provide live comments during our EMP working group. In order to provide live comments on the Zoom platform, click on the raise hand icon in the Zoom toolbar, which is on the top right of your screen. The chair will call on you by the name you have provided. If you are participating by phone, press the *9 to indicate your desire to speak. The chair will call on you by the last 4 digits of your phone number. Press *6 to unmute. The instructions for providing live comments are also on the bottom of the cover page of today's meeting agenda, which can be accessed from the homepage of Sandag's website at www.sandag.org. All comments, whether emailed or live, will be made a part of today's meeting record. So back to you, Leanne.
Thanks. And if you forget any of that, we'll muddle through and figure it out. So let's get started with item number 2, approval of the January 11th, 2022 meeting minutes. Are there any public comments on this item? Please raise your hand. And Kim and Courtney, I'm going to need your help on this. I've only got one screen today.
Yeah, I don't see any hands raised.
Are there any member comments on the minutes?
This is from January 11th. That's the last time we got together. Are you kidding me?
March was canceled, so.
Yeah. So I don't remember what I had for dinner last night, but I'm okay. I'll make a motion to approve.
I appreciate that, Jim. We have a motion to approve. Do I have a second?
I'll second. This is Chris Jacobs from Santee.
Thanks, Chris. So I have a motion and a second. I'll call on Kim for the roll call vote. Please say yes or no, or abstain when called on by Kim.
Okay, I'm going to just go down the panelist list. Jim Whalen,
Yes.
Leanne Carmichael,
Yes.
Michael Beck,
Yes.
David Mayer,
Yes.
Right. So
okay, Candace Woe,
Yes.
Michael Beck. I already called on you, Michael, right?
Yeah.
Robert Fisher,
yep.
Chris Jacobs,
Yes.
Dan Monroe,
Yes.
Stephanie Cervantes,
Yes.
Stefan Galvez,
Yes.
Susan Wynn,
Yes.
and Trish Smith.
Yes.
I think, did I miss anyone?
I think you missed me, Roseanne.
Oh, sorry, Roseanne.
Yes.
And Ann Harvey is also on.
And Anne.
I
Anne,
approve.
oh, thank you. We have unanimous approval.
Great. So let's go ahead and move on to number 3, public and member comments. I will ask members of the public who wish to offer public comment not related to a matter on today's agenda to please raise your hand at this time so we can call on you.
Okay, I've got one public comment, Tim Bylash. And I think we have to allow him to talk here.
Good afternoon, committee. Thank you for having my comments. I hope this is an appropriate time to mention this. I live in Del Mar, California. I'm a physician and scientist, and by the San Dieguito Lagoon, which I believe Sandag is restoring. So I don't think it's on the agenda, and this is not really about that per se. But they just did a massive mitigation for drainage coming from the Del Mar Heights Boulevard down through the all the areas that are up there to drain into the lagoon because the mountains are falling down here on the coast. And my understanding is that tracking and double tracking and moving of the rail lines are underway. So right by the area of the fairgrounds, there is a new roundabout, which is very nice. And there's an area they're thinking of developing, putting some condos up. And because of the double tracking, I'm just wondering, I haven't heard very much comment because I'm not connected, for using some of this area as public areas for a science center. The San Dieguito Lagoon is a wonderful natural area. There's a walk right along it to the ocean. And there is a little bit of land probably going to open up, but it's kind of in the middle of San Diego City, Del Mar City, the coastal commissions and other people. But I don't know if any thought has been to whether or not that would be a nice place to put a low-key environmental awareness science center that members of the San Diego County and children and schools could come as a resource to understand the fragility of the coastal areas. And so I just wanted to mention that because I don't know who's involved in that. And this might be a committee that would have some interest in it, or so I thought I would mention it. And thank you for having me at your meeting.
Thanks, Tim. I don't know if Sandag has any thoughts on that, or if anybody has any information on that.
I can go ahead. And Tim, this is Keith Greer. I'm the principal here at Sandag in charge of environmental programs. I'll pass along to you Shawn Anderson's email. She's the head of the JPA out in that area. And I think she'd be an appropriate contact for you to pass along that information to.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Wait, are you going to put that in the chat or?
I'll put it in the chat for you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Keith. Do we have any other public comments?
I do not see any.
Okay, I see Robert has his hand up for member comments. Let's start with Robert.
Shocking, right? That I have my hand up. Can I share my screen for just a sec? Is that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, let me do that. So this is a red-legged frog. You guys see it or not?
Yeah.
So that's a red-legged frog from Mesa Grande that we caught last week, and it's it's from an egg mass we moved from Mexico, from Baja California in March of 2020. So it's an adult frog that's now living in the wild in Mesa Grande for over 24 months. This is the first time red-legged frogs have been back in San Diego County for like 50 years, since the 70s. And so this is becoming hopefully very successful. We're hoping these frogs will breed next spring. This is a partnership with Sandag. We funded in part the invasives removal at the site, a lot of that work on bullfrog eradication. And then Fish and Wildlife Service Partners Program has funded a lot of the reintroduction work. Nature Conservancy owns the conservation easement there. The Natural History Museum is heavily involved, as is Fauna Noreste. It's a Mexican NGO. And so we're having a lot of success here. And so this is a wild hatch through now adult at that Mesa Grande site from last week. So anyway, I just wanted to highlight that. And then highlight a couple other real quick things. I'll send these papers around like I did last time. So this is paper that just came out 2 weeks ago on this effort. And so these are the partners in collaboration. So I can send that paper around. And then we had a recent paper that just came out on long distance movements in golden eagles, which were the SANDAG work is a part of, and understanding these non-migratory birds and why they go so far and where they go. And we had another recent paper on that SANDAG has played a role in range-wide persistence of the arroyo toad following during the drought. And so I just wanted to highlight those couple of recent papers, and then that the success with the red-legged frogs is due entirely to being able to clear that site of invasives as part of the SANDAG work we're doing with restoring riparian habitats for different covered species and listed species. So that was what I just wanted to state, and then I can send these links to these papers. They're all available online, or we can send the PDFs around.
Thank you, Robert. That's
Yeah,
great
very cool.
news. We always like to hear
Great.
the good news and
Great.
the
Yeah,
great.
successes.
Super exciting. We can do a field trip out there at some point if you want to see that. It's one of the few places you can walk out at night and not get attacked by mosquitoes, because the invertebrate community is so robust, because we removed the invasives that were impacting the dragonfly larvae. And so it's shocking. You can be out at this pond at night and there's no mosquitoes, and we red-legged frogs. So we can try to set up a field trip at some point for whoever wants to go.
Wow, great.
Yeah. Okay. There we go. We've got the screen back. Thanks, Robert. Are there any other members' comments? You see any, Kim?
No, I don't.
Okay. Well, if we have no further comments, we'll move on to item number 4 on the agenda. Kim will be providing us information on the formation of an ad hoc committee for the development of the fiscal year 22-23 work plan for the regional management and monitoring, and the annual update of the funding for fiscal year 2023. Kim?
Okay, it's you guys, it's that time of year again. I feel like we were just here, but so we'll need to put together an ad hoc committee of about 6 or 7 folks to help with the development of, I think I had a typo in your script, Leon, but it's the fiscal year 2023-2024 work plan for regional management and monitoring. And this is the plan that outlines the goals and milestones for implementing the management strategic plan over that 2-year period. And in addition, this committee will also develop the recommendation for the allocation of the funding for fiscal year 2023. So if I can see a hand for those folks that would like to volunteer, and I anticipate we'll probably meet in late July, early August, so we could come back to the working group in September with the recommendation to move forward to RPC, TC, and the board this fall for the funding approval. So let me get this down. See, I've got Dave, Mayor, I've got Susan, Jim or Trish, Jim, Leanne, and Robert.
I'm raising my
Oh.
hand, Kim.
You're raising your hand. Okay, Michael, got it. That's perfect. Thank you.
Okay, so you've got all those, Kim?
Got them all. Yep.
Okay. Do we also ask for public comments on this as well, Kim?
We do.
Okay, so are there any public comments? Everybody put your hands down now that don't want to comment. Thank you. Do you see any, Kim?
No.
Okay, and any additional members' comments? Michael, is your hand still up to comment?
No, it's down. Oh, no, it's not.
Now it is. Okay. Thank you, Kim. We'll go on to item number 5 on the agenda, the EMP Land Management Grant Program draft project rankings for the 10th cycle of grant funding. Courtney and Susan Nguyen will present the results of the EMPWG ad hoc committees, funding recommendations on applications that we received under the 10th call for projects for land management grants. A total of 29 grant applications were received, and the EMPWG is asked to make a recommendation to the regional planning and transportation committees regarding the recommended list of projects for funding of the 10th cycle of land management grants. So I'll now turn it over to Courtney and Susan.
Thank you, Leanne. I'll kick it off. So as Leanne just mentioned, my name is Courtney Pesh, for those of you who may not know, and I'm a regional planner 2 here at Sandag. So over the past 2 years, a very long road and journey, I've worked very closely with the EMP Land Management Grants 10th cycle. And so I'm going to kick off our discussion, and then Susan will kind of go into further detail about the project rankings. So for some background information, the formation of the evaluation committee was called back in 2020 by members of the EMP working group. And those members included Susan, Leanne, Robert, Trish, Candace, and Dave Mayer. And I do want to mention, so prior to the meeting, the evaluators independently reviewed, scored, and ranked the submitted proposals for the species and habitat recovery projects and the threat reduction stewardship projects based on the evaluation criteria for the 10th cycle, which was call for projects, which was originally released on October 25th of 2021. A total, as Leanne mentioned, a total of 29 project proposals were received, 17 for the species and habitat recovery category, and 12 were received for the threats reduction stewardship category. The evaluation committee met on March 8th to collectively discuss, score, and rank the 29 submitted proposals. I want to highlight that this was not an easy task whatsoever. The evaluation committee, with much discussion and back and forth, have proposed the recommendations for projects to award for the 10th cycle included in today's meeting agenda. In total, the evaluation committee recommends to award 20 project proposals, 11 for the short-term projects for threats reduction stewardship, and 8 for the longer-term projects, so species and habitat recovery. After today's discussion, Sandag will be taking the EMP land management grants project recommendations pending the EMP working group's discussion to the Independent Taxpayer Oversight Committee, the Policy Advisory Committees, and the Board of Directors this September for approval to award the selected projects. It is then anticipated that the notice proceed will be released later this year in the fall. Individual debrief meetings can be requested after the September Board of Directors meeting to discuss any of these recommendations in further detail. I will now turn the discussion over to Susan to kind of walk us through the project recommendations and rankings.
All right, and I'm going to apologize up front. My internet's kind of blinking in and out, so hopefully this will work. As you recall, there was the 2 different categories. So there was the threat reduction stewardship projects, which were the smaller, shorter term projects. And we were able to fund 11 out of 12 of those, so we almost were able to fund every project. And these focused, kind of across the county, from the, down near the border, looking at Otay Mesa, vernal pools, and stink net removal. Through the middle, we hit San Diego Thorn Mint and San Miguel. The Otay Water District had a fencing, and access control. And then, coastal, we had a couple coastal. So looking at the least turn nesting in D Street fill from the port. An interesting project from Earth Discovery Institute for bats. We're kind of excited about this one, trying some new techniques to improve habitat for bats. So a real variety of projects across the board. And like I said, we were able to fund almost every project that was submitted in that group. And then shifting over to the other category, which is kind of your bigger projects, longer term, we funded about not quite half of the projects in this group. But these were some bigger projects. So at the top, the Safari Park Biodiversity Reserve, really jumping on the stink net. That's a threat that, we're hoping to minimize its spread. It's known from the San Pasqual Valley there, and that the site on Otay. So really jumping in on that. That project had a nice collective effort of partners. Then down in the south, Ocean Beach, looking at where the San Diego River comes out, and so that was controlling access and a lot of education to improve things there in Ocean Beach. And then a couple other projects, the San Diego River, looking at cactus wren, Dannery Canyon, looking at some rare plants, and heading out to Ramona with the county and bullfrog control, which similar to the project that Robert described. So trying to enhance some of those aquatic ponds for southwestern pond turtle, and maybe another new introduction site for red-legged frog if we can control the exotics. It seems most of these projects, as you read into them, are focused on control of either invasive plants or animals. And in controlling those invasives, that alone causes a huge benefit to our rare covered species. And then the final project, which we weren't able to fully fund, but the Rare Dune Plant Restoration Project by Nature Collective. So we were able to fund a portion of that project. Some of the projects that we weren't able to fund are still great projects, but there just wasn't enough money in the bucket. But overall, this year's set of projects were really great. It covered a lot of different species, a lot of different areas in the county, a lot of different applicants. They were, every year they're better written, and it gets harder and harder to rank them. So we really rely on sort of matching them up with the priorities in the management strategic plan, and in trying to discern, which projects float to the top. So I don't know if any of the other reviewers want to add anything. From the committee, Candace, Dave, Leanne, Robert, or Trish.
And that was a good overview, Susan.
And maybe the one last thing I'll add is that I'm always find it interesting when we do our reviews, because we have a real variety of folks, both between the wildlife agencies and local jurisdictions, and Candace at the San Diego Foundation. We all come review these from a different perspective, and yet we generally arrive at the same conclusions. This year was that we were pretty solidly aligned on which projects floated to the top.
Looks like David had his hand up.
I just wanted to mention, so Kim, if one of the applicants had specific questions maybe on why, if there was a critique on the proposal or something thought was missing, is that something that you would have the access to? Would they go to you for that?
Yeah, and our grants team.
Okay.
And those types of meetings can be requested once we move forward and get approval eventually by the board of directors. So later this fall, we can schedule those individual debriefing meetings to go into further detail.
Yeah, just following on Susan, that there were some very good proposals that maybe were just missing a particular component or a lack of specificity, and that may have cost them getting across the line.
Keith, I see your hands up. Did you want to say something now, or?
Yeah, I actually have a question for the committee members, but first of all, kind of makes me happy to see all this money going towards these type of approaches that, as Robert showed, kind of really bears fruit, kind of protecting endangered species and bringing them back. So I'm excited about the grants. My question is more on process. Does anybody in the committee who went through it this year have any recommendations for making the process easier or quicker? And this is something we try to do every year to try to make improvements, incremental improvements. So anybody on the committee, or Susan, if you want to ask, is there anything we can pass along?
I think that every year we refine sort of the rankings and the criteria. And this year we introduced some new criteria related to, social justice, equity, which, was a new criteria for us. So I think there's room for maybe a little more clarity on what does that mean and how might we rank those projects. I think, that was one that, like I said, anytime we introduce a new criteria, there's a learning curve. So I think maybe a little more guidance on how to address that,
And I think, Susan, at least for that criteria, we're the first grant program to introduce something like that most recently. So I think there is room for improvement once we go out with our 11th cycle.
Now
Yeah.
we've seen kind of a collective think from all the people that applied on what it meant to them and how they responded to that question and that criteria. And so we can probably review those responses too. And there's kind of a couple different ways to look at it. So that would be the category I'd want to focus on.
Yeah, I'd say that was the most, it seems like we need to do more what might fit into that category, because the responses were so broad and from different applicants that from we're not doing anything to we're doing everything. It was just the whole gamut. And I just think we need to interpret what we want from that better to people. But I was glad that we added it. And like Susan and Kim said, it was good it gave us an idea of how people are thinking about it and how we need to think about giving them better ways to think about it. Whatever. And we need to training on that one. It's like the climate change one when we had that, where there's all kinds of ways you can interpret your climate positive influence or whatever.
That's a good point, because some folks said we don't have anything to say on that topic, and yet they're doing the same kind of things that someone else expounded on. And so, one got points and the other one didn't, because they didn't say anything related to it. But
yeah,
so some guidance on that would be helpful.
Because it ranged from well, I'm going to hire, workers from these different groups. And so that's a benefit versus my project's located in a neighborhood that will benefit, the community to, so that they were really, different ways to approach it. Or, I'm going to have a public outreach education component and help folks in that regard. So, like I said, I think we had good conversation about it. And like I said, it would be, I think if we inventoried sort of the different types of responses we got, and then we made it more explicit, what we were looking for, that would be helpful. But I think it was good. It was a good extra criteria to include.
Okay. Nothing else on that? Well, does anyone have any comments from the public on this topic?
Yeah, we have 2 hands up. I'll call on Tim Bylash first.
Thank you, committee. I found this a very interesting and succinct list of different projects, and appreciate the effort that went into that. Wanted to ask, is there any place on the web that these projects would be available similar to this kind of listing, where you click on the project and it takes you out to a page, just a partial page or one page picture and description to make a little more public outreach available? Some of the meetings I've been to in person for the bikeways, they had pictures of the bikeways kind of before and after or something like that, just as a public outreach to make it a little better known. Just was wondering if that, and this is a very nice list in and of itself, but I was thinking I want to I want to click on that and find out a little bit about it. Could it take it to somewhere or provide some public information? Thank you for taking my comment, and thank you for the committees.
And I can address that comment. We do have, as part of our environmental mitigation working group page on our website, sandag.org, we do have a link to the grants page. But in addition, as at least starting with this grant cycle, it was a requirement that each of the grantees, and Courtney, jump in if I'm speaking, not speaking correctly on this, but that they set up a project page. So you will be able to access information on those grants projects as part of this grant cycle moving forward.
Yes, and I would just wanted to add, and I can put it in the chat for you, Tim, that we do have a running list similar to what this spreadsheet looks like of projects that have been completed and have been awarded in the past, linking directly to SDM&P, so San Diego's Management and Monitoring Programs project pages, so you can find more specific information on the data or the process or the procedures.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Tim. I also see we have Bob Leiter.
Hi,
thank you. Yeah, I wanted to comment on the process and the criteria. I think it's really gratifying for me to see the progress that you all are making in implementing the environmental mitigation program and it in turn implementing our regional multiple species conservation plan. And in thinking back on when the MSCP was originally adopted and what we're looking at now in terms of current issues, there are a couple of issues that I think are going to be more and more important to address as you allocate funding for management and monitoring. And the one you talked about has to do with social equity. And I want to just refer you to the programs that are run by the County Water Authority for the Integrated Regional Water Management Program. They allocate millions of dollars of state funds for water-related activities. And they have what I consider to be a very sophisticated approach to addressing benefits and impacts on disadvantaged communities. So I'd recommend you take a look at that before your next round. The other issue that I think is really important, and I'm not sure if you incorporated this into your criteria this time around, is the impacts of climate change on our habitat and our natural systems. And I think it'll be really important in the next round to also consider criteria that would ensure that projects that are going to deal with some of the really serious impacts of climate change on our natural systems are given adequate credit. So those would be my two comments on your process today.
Thank you, Bob. Sarah?
Oh.
Go ahead and take your hands down when you're done, please.
I just wanted to say thank you on behalf of the San Diego River Park Foundation, one of the applicants, that we really appreciate the amount of work it takes to evaluate this number of applications. So we are really excited about being able to get started on some of this work, and thank you very much to the committee.
Okay, I don't see any other public comments.
No.
So let's go ahead. Panelists, do you have any comments before we call for a motion? Michael.
No, I just wanted to kind of echo Bob's comments about the progress. And I was on a large call this morning, kind of a national coalition call. And, once again, the actual implementation of these plans and the progress on recovering species and so on it's not happening at this level anywhere that I know of in the country. So it's just appreciation for all the good work and both staff and applicants.
Michael, is that a motion to approve?
It is.
Thank you very much. Can I get a second?
Second.
Candace, was that you? Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Kim, let's call for the roll call,
Okay.
please.
Leanne Carmichael,
Yes.
David Mayer,
Approve.
let's see, Ann Harvey,
Yes.
Michael Beck,
Yes.
Jim Whalen,
Yes.
Robert Fisher,
Yes.
Stefan Galvez,
Yes.
let's see, Candace Woe,
Yes.
Chris Jacobs,
Yes.
Dan Monroe,
Yes.
David Mayer,
Still yes.
Jim Whalen.
You already asked me.
Oh, I did. I'm sorry. This
That's
keeps
okay.
jumping around. Roseanne Humphrey,
Yes.
Roseanne,
Yes.
Stephanie Cervantes,
Yes.
Susan Wynn,
Yes.
and Trish Smith. I think I got everybody.
Yes. Yes.
Oh, nope. And Matt Adams.
There you go. I was waiting. Thank you for thinking of me. I'm a yes as well.
Thank you. Well, that passes unanimously. Thank you, everyone.
Great. And I want to thank Courtney and Susan for the presentation today. Well spoken on that. And I also want to thank the other committee members for the time and effort, because it is a lot of effort to go through the 29 grant applications, and it's a robust conversation when we get together, and I appreciate everybody's efforts. So moving on, next up we have item number 6. At past meetings, we've discussed Sandag's desire to move forward with a restructuring of the working groups. Not just ours, I understand, but Kim will be presenting the draft Regional Habitat Conservation Task Force Charter and asking for member input. So go ahead, Kim.
Thank you, Leanne. So yes, back in January at our last meeting, if you can remember, Keith did give a brief presentation on the restructuring of our working groups. So Sandag, we are moving ahead with that restructuring, and we're hoping to have that before our executive committee and the Sandag board to take an action to approve in August or September. And attached to this meeting agenda, you should have had the one-page draft Regional Habitat Conservation Task Force Charter. We're calling it Rehab for short. And overall, really not much is changing. The new task force is going to continue to provide input and a forum on regional habitat conservation issues and items related to the environmental mitigation program. We've also included input to implement our regional habitat conservation vision as part of the regional plan. Membership is going to stay the same with a few additions. We've added representation from the Southern California Tribal Chairmen's Association, the Natural History Museum, and the Resource Conservation District of Greater San Diego. And those folks we all felt have an input on, as you could see in parentheses, either science and or land management issues. So just quickly, bottom line, I kind of put together what are the pros and what are the cons of restructuring working groups. There's a longer list of pros, at least of what we came up with. There's no Brown Act rules will apply. So we don't have to have formal agendas. We don't need 72 hours before we post an agenda. So at least on our side, it's a little bit more efficient and administering of the working group or the task force. No Form 700s. I know that we ask you guys when you become members and or you leave membership to fill out a Form 700, and we won't need to do that anymore. There is one exception, though, when we do move ahead with our grant committee or selection, we will have those folks who volunteer. They will have to fill out a Form 700 to make sure there's no conflicts. We can still meet. We won't if we don't have quorum, so that will be great. We can meet virtually if needed. I mean, if we decide that we're getting more folks viewing this meeting virtually or on topics, we can make that decision in the future. It's more flexibility on when we can meet. My thought is we're going to keep on with this quarterly meeting, but if something pops up that we need to have an action on or form a committee to discuss, we can meet monthly if need be. And then finally, we do not have to have an elected official as our chair. We can pick our own chair. So we will be doing that come September. And then really the only con that we could think of was that, so any recommendations that this task force is going to make is going to be to Sandag staff, who will then go to the regional planning committee with that recommendation. So the task force charter is not directly, the recommendation is not going directly to RPC. It's first going to Sandag staff, then to RPC. So our next meeting in September is likely going to be the first meeting of our task force. In August, look for an email for all those folks that are listed as far as being a member of the task force to confirm your primary representative and then an alternate. So that concludes my short little presentation. I hope everyone had a chance to review it, and then I thought we can move forward with.
Let me address some of the larger issues that Leanne brought up. So this isn't just being EMP related. This is Sandag agency wide. Sandag has 23 working groups, and some of those working groups are kind of been around for many years. They haven't been reformulated. They're not focusing right now on any kind of substantive issues. Other ones are very specific on a topic like EMP. So I'll give an opportunity for Sandag staff to discuss this with our executive committee back in January. And the executive committee said, we'd like to have less working groups, not more, but we want to have task force that delve into specific issues. For example, shoreline preservation or climate change, or in this case, regional habitat conservation. So this is a larger effort that will go to our executive committee in July. The plan right now is to have only 7 working groups, and all those would be kind of at the high level membership agency discussions on policy, and have many more task forces as they come up, whether it's on a specific project, like maybe there's one for a regional transportation bike plan, or topical area. I know I'm setting up one for shoreline, and we'll have one set up here for regional habitat conservation. So that's the direction. I think on a day-to-day basis, when I addressed you last time, I said you won't see or feel anything different. That remains the same. Kim will still have to take reports to the regional planning committee onto the board, and we will be making mention of the action the task force takes on those recommendations. So with that, I'll turn it back over to the chair, Leanne, and address any questions they may have.
So we would actually have to put on our calendar that we're going to rehab, huh?
By the way, that's Kim's idea, not mine.
Some of us, it might be a little sensitive. Just put that out there.
Yeah.
Yeah, or not the first time.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have to, if the input is no, then we don't have to have the acronym. We can just have
Deep in
Regional
your
Habitat Conservation Task Force.
rehab, whatever. Can I ask a question, Kim?
We will do public comments real quick, and then we'll do panelists. So I see Tim, you have your hand up.
Thank you. I don't mean to prolong the meeting, but I'm still learning all the different parts of Sandag. Is there could someone explain the difference, or somewhere I could find the difference between a subcommittees versus the task force and the reorganization?
I'll go ahead and put that link in the chat for you, Tim, and it'll explain the difference between a subcommittee, a policy advisory committee, a working group, and a task force. And I don't blame you if you're confused. There's a lot of acronyms.
Thank you so much.
And Tim, you're not alone in being confused by some of this. Okay, Committee members. Michael?
Yeah, thanks. I haven't read the description, so with that caveat, just to clarify then, our EMP working group is now going to be called this Rehab Task Force. And it's the same membership with the additions that you mentioned, which I think are all good. The one, I think, loss that we get through this process is not having an elected official chairing our meetings. I know that creates a complication, but it's pretty nice to have those folks advocating at the board hearings, and that's now going to be, I think, kind of a net loss. But otherwise, we're meeting quarterly, same membership with those additions. Is that basically our world now?
Correct. I mean, we're still going to be forming committees to, every year we have to approve the
Right.
funding. We've got to do the work plan. So, and the grants. So yes.
All right. Thanks.
Jim?
That was the only thing I was going to say is you lose something when you don't have an elected there. I don't know. There's nothing you can do about it, huh?
If you can find an elected that wants to sit on the task force, we'd be happy to invite them.
Oh, so there's no prohibition. You're just letting them off the hook.
Yeah, I mean, we've
Okay.
tried for the last, since our last elected official left 3 years now. There has been,
Yeah, she got booted out of office too, so not coming back. Well, so, okay, so there's no prohibition. It's simply that we don't have one.
Yep.
Okay. Well, seems about the same.
that's the intent.
Susan Wynn?
So two things. So one, if I think the name's funny, but if people don't like the name, I mean, we could look to the terminology that was in MSCP about, there was I'm not even going to remember, what was the Keith, the committee that was, basically the same makeup.
I've forgotten, but I think we're up to.
There's the Habitat Management Technical Committee, and there was the ICC, it was the ICC, Implementing Coordination Committee.
I think if
right?
we forget about it, we just need to have something that everybody remembers, whatever that is. Everybody can remember it.
Right, but I mean, if we wanted to use terminology like that, I think it was the ICC Implementing Coordination Committee or something along those lines, because it is effectively fulfilling those roles of MSCP, and so maybe that tidies it up. So that's one suggestion if Jim's upset about going to rehab. And then my second question is, a few of us also have we advise, or I don't know what our role is on the regional planning committee. Does that change with us, now that we're not on an EMP, are we not the EMP? Like the service and the core and the department all have a advisory role on the regional planning committee. Does that change with these changes?
Nope, that's independent regional plan committee issue.
Okay. Those were my two questions.
Ann Monroe.
Yeah, just a question regarding recommendations. I assume that there's no kind of fundamental change of how the recommendations are forwarded to the board. It's just now they would be included, I assume, as part of a staff report that's sent to the board. So there's no real major difference between recommendations going directly to the board versus going through the staff.
The reality is all the recommendations that currently on the working group go through staff anyways in the staff report.
Okay.
So really pragmatically, there's no difference there, except for the one's a task force, one's a working group, one's set up as a policy related issue that makes direct recommendations to regional planning committee. The other one is discussion amongst peers here, and then that recommendation gets funneled through Kim to the regional planning committee.
And just to clarify, for most of or all of our items, like the land management grants and or funding, we have to go to the RPC, or regional planning committee, TC, and to the board and ITALC. So I still have to make the triple jump, as they say. So
thank you.
I don't see any more hands, Leanne.
Tim, I still see your hand up, but I assume you've already spoken. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. And this is just an informational item at this point. We don't have any need for a motion, correct, Kim?
Correct.
Okay, so now on to our last item, item number 7, regional habitat conservation needs and acquisitions. Kim and Keith Greer are here to give an update on the needs assessment for regional habitat acquisitions. Kim and Keith.
Can you want to kick this off and then turn it over to me?
Sure. So this is our presentation on our regional habitat conservation needs, specifically on acquisitions. Back in January, we formed an ad hoc committee to look at, and Keith will go over this, but to look at specifically updating our 2010 estimates on our regional habitat conservation needs for acquisitions, management, and monitoring. We first decided to split it up, meet on acquisitions and then management and monitoring. We met in April on acquisitions and gathered input with that ad hoc group, and then have also been gathering data to come up with really it's how much left do we need to acquire and what is it going to cost. So I'm going to kick it over to Keith to walk you through what information we gathered and where we are right now. So Keith.
Thanks, Kim. And Laura, why don't you bring the PowerPoint up, please? So today is a check-in. Today is we want to kind of tell you what we're working on, get some input along the way, and then come back to you in September with some more refined estimates, both on the habitat acquisition side of the equation, but also on the management and monitoring side. So over the summertime, Kim and I kind of divided the workload. I'm taking the lead on the habitat conservation estimates for determining how much land needs to be acquired and how much that will cost. And she's taking the lead on the management monitoring, how much land needs to be managed, what's the cost associated with that, and how much do we need to do for regional monitoring. If this sounds familiar to many of you, we've gone through this before. Back in 2010, we took an effort very similar to look at this cost for regional habitat conservation planning for something that we call the regional funding source. What's the amount that we need for the regional funding source? The current efforts being made as part of the recent adoption of the 2021 regional plan. If you remember, we had a regional habitat conservation vision included in that plan and a commitment for funding of the vision. How it gets funded, that's an item to be determined. Many of you probably read the newspaper today about the issue about the citizens initiative going forward that may or may not go forward now in November. But either way, the Sandag board will ultimately be asked to put something on the ballot. And a part of that will be funding for regional habitat conservation. So I want to check in today. Everything we're doing here is draft. Please don't get, the information is only as good as the data we have. So it's a process of refinement over the next couple of months. So let's skip on this when we talked about the 2010 effort and our habitat vision. Next slide. So back in 2010, we kind of had 4 buckets, and a 5th bucket we actually discussed as well. There's how much we need to acquire land, how much does that manage that land, what's the biological monitoring, and a contingency for all that. We still think that's an appropriate 4 buckets. An endowment was subsequently, we talked about as a working group, but it was dropped because it was determined to be illegal to fund a sales tax provision for endowments. But this is the effort we're trying to update now from 2010 to today's dollars. Next slide. So where we've been in January, we talked about this item with the working group. We formed some ad hoc committees. March, we started off with the regional habitat needs assessment, which is the habitat acquisition components of it in April. And then again, we're going to be meeting again from the EMP working group today. And then we'll have an ad hoc meeting on the management monitoring sometime later this July or August, leading back to another discussion in the working group for you in September. Next slide. The real fundamental questions for today that we want input on is how much land is left to be acquired to claim success for the regional habitat conservation efforts, and how much will that land cost? And a lot of today, the information I'm presenting next, we agree we don't have it right. We're looking for feedback and input because we're getting closer and closer on narrowing in on an appropriate number for how much is to be acquired and what that cost will be. But we need your input as well to get that number more refined. Next slide. So first, I'd like to talk about how we went about estimating, again, this is an estimate of the acquisitions that are needed under the NCCP to claim success under these plans. And again, this is a planning level estimate. I'm not looking at specific parcels that should be acquired, even though you'll have the ability to see some of that in a second. But it's at planning level. Are we in the realm of reasonability in terms of how much land needs to be acquired and ultimately how much that land will cost? Next slide. So just to remind many of you and those of you who are new, there's 4 regional habitat conservation planning efforts in San Diego County and the military lands. The military lands are shown in gray. They're on their own separate unique issue, and so we're not addressing those today. The MHCP, the Multiple Habitat Conservation Plan, shown here in pink, is the North County cities efforts, of which the subarea plan was approved, but only one city of Carlsbad, has an adopted subarea plan. The MSV East, shown in the kind of buff color, far east, that's the county's effort. You go ahead and have a future regional plan out there. That work hasn't started yet. So again, we're going to drop that out from today's discussions and focus in on the last 2 as well, which is the MSCP East, South County, shown in green, which is the city, county, and the other cities in the southern areas of the area. That plans have been adopted in 1997 and on. And then finally, the MSCP North, which is in its planning phases for the county of San Diego up here, North County. Next slide. So with those, each one of those are unique in terms of their status, of their planning, and their current acquisitions. Next slide, Dorn. There we go. So how to approach this? How much is needed? How much land is needed to claim success? Well, first, let me focus in on the MHCP, that's the North County City Plans, and the MSCP South. Those are both plans are farther along than the planning level efforts on the MSCP North. So one way of approaching this is you could say, how much did it say was needed to be acquired in the regional conservation plans? And that would be claiming success, kind of a regulatory component. We've acquired X amount of lands. We said we were going to acquire Y amount of lands. And if those equal or greater, then you claim success. And what we see here is that both the MHCP and the MSCP South, these federal and state and local acquisitions have really surpassed the estimated conservation targets in the regional plans. For example, right here, you see the federal and state and the locals are over 100% of what was envisioned to be acquired under that plan. And also the MSCP South, you'll see an equal number of conservation. So that's good. Good news is we've acquired a lot of land, and we've done a great job in terms of making those commitments. Next slide. So this is just an example of the MSCP South. And again, it's over 100% for federal and state and local conservation efforts. So now you could say that the private development is required to exact or provide mitigation for the rest of that land. Okay, that's one way of looking at it. We met with our subcommittee and we presented this information, and the subcommittee said, yeah, but there's regulatory success and then there's biological success. And so you don't want to rely upon exactions and mitigation to really drive the ultimate preserve design, because you could have conflicts there. So we better be more proactive and still have funding for acquisitions in these 2 planning areas so that you don't have a preserve design problem. And next slide, I'll show you what I mean by preserve design problems in a second. So, I guess this, back up. Okay, so this is a biological core linkage areas. One more, Lauren, I'm sorry. I've changed some slides around. So there's 2 areas that we want to look at. These are the actual important areas in these 2 plans. One we call the MSCP South, the biological core and linkage areas. And for the MHCP, which is the North County City Plans, we call it the focus planning area. So within those, we want to make sure that whatever is being acquired in the future, or where it's being developed, I should say, doesn't prohibit good preserve design. Next slide. This is the slide I was looking for, which kind of gives an illustrative example of what we're trying to accomplish here. This is our North County city areas, the MHCP. And you see that there's development on the left-hand side, subdivision, and industrial park on the right-hand side. And then you've got this nice corridor right through the middle here. Part of that corridor is conserved. But right in the middle, you see agricultural lands. That's that kind of triangle piece of shape that's right in the center there. If you let that continue, the developer is private land. It is allowable for development, it's zoned for development. And ultimately, you'd have some configuration worked out with the city is in charge of that. And you come up with a preserved design. But that development right there would possibly hinder the preserve as we have envisioned it. So we envision something like this, that you'd want to actually put some funding aside to acquire properties like this, where good preserve design would warrant acquisition of the entire property. So that's easy to conceptualize, a lot harder to work in reality. So what we did is we started to take an effort, GIS exercise, to look at all parcels in the areas of the MSCP and MHCP that could potentially affect preserve design. Next slide. And here's our methodology. Part of it's going to be GIS and part of it's just subjective. And I'll be the first to own that. And we're going to ask your help to kind of refine these numbers that we come up with. So for our GIS exercise, we said, we want to know all the privately owned property that's not conserved. We're not trying to target properties already conserved. That's greater than 50% in the preserve. So the idea is if it's greater, if it had 50% outside the preserve, you would need to acquire it because the rest of it would be acquired through the entitlement process. And are in the core biological linkage areas for the MSC South or the focus planning area for the multiple habitat conservation plan. That was our GIS exercise that we then came up with a group of targeted parcels. Of those parcels, we then put them in one of four categories. The fourth tier category is the one that we don't have to worry about anymore. Are land uses, that parcels that the land use designate them as open space or preserves, either in the general plans for the city, or alternatively, any kind of other land use plans that we have in the San Diego land use files. Meaning we don't have to worry about acquiring those, they're going to be protected. Category 3, non-native habitat that is not designated as open space or preserve. And a more sensitive category, category 2, is native habitat that's not in those above open space or preserve areas. Finally, from the last category, the most important tier from our perspective was to look at both those non-native and native habitat lands not designated as preserve and would affect preserve design, meaning that we believe that there'd be less than a quarter width if you let them to be developed. Subjectively, it was Kim and my best efforts to go through this. And what we have come up with is a universe of target parcels brought into one of those four tier types. The focus of our discussions will be on tier 1, but we also have tier 2, 3, and 4 identified in the GIS effort. Next slide. So what you're going to see here is a map on the right-hand side that shows the MSCP focus, core and biological engaged areas, and the MHCP focused areas in that kind of olive color. That's the preserve design that's important. You also see on top of that then overlay these parcels. The most important acquisition tiers in our minds that could affect preserve design are shown in red. And you can see the far right-hand side, I'll just give you some examples. Closer to the bottom, that's the Hamul area. That if that was all developed, you'd see that there would be a preserve configuration problem. And then up there, you have other areas as well that we've identified in red as being areas that need to be acquired so that there doesn't be a preserve configuration problem. You can't see them as well, but we also have these areas of pink and yellow, which is both the native and non-native habitats that we thought could be developed in the preserve without kind of preserve configurations. And we're not proposing those be acquired. And then finally in green is the area that's open space parcels and preserves in the land use plans. So the focus today that I want to have a conversation about is the red areas, or at least we'll present what we've done, which represents 1,900 acres in MHCP, or about 10%. So that's 10% of the properties in MHCP, and about 19,000 acres in MSCP South. That's also about roughly over 10, 12% of the MSCP South area. Those are the areas we think that focused acquisitions should occur. But how much? We really don't know. Should it be like 80%, 50%? We don't know. That's what we're looking for feedback on. At the end of the day, we're also going to be putting this on, making this available through a Google Earth type of application. So you can look at these parcels and give your input as well. Next slide. So we'll come back and talk about this in a little bit more about when this all gets put together and get some input from the committee. But I want to move on to the MSCP North. So we understand that the MSCP North is undergoing a revision. The best information we had right now is the 2009 plan. And in that plan, there was a table here of cost estimates and land acquisitions for public agencies of 27,534 acres, which for purposes of today, we assume that half of that would be a local share need to be acquired, or 13,760 acres. As a side note, we'll come to it later, in the 2009 plan, they estimated that cost would be $15,000 per acre. And if you just put that through inflation, the cost today would be about $39,000 per acre. So that for us kind of summarized the amount of land that needed to be acquired in MSP North. And I know we don't have the specific parcels, but I think that's, until we have better information, that's the most that we can help out with on MSCP North. Next slide. The last planning effort is MSP East conservation targets. There's no plan available, and our recommendation right now is to defer estimates until a plan is developed, and we can put that as part of a future conservation measure. So summarizing all the conservation targets for item for discussion, next slide. This table shows the planning area, MHCP, MSCP South, MSCP North, East County, and our targets for conservation acreages. Again, this is a first draft recommendation. We're looking for feedback over the rest of the summer. We're looking for more input, but I think this is a world of getting us down, honing in on how much land needs to be acquired to not only claim success regulatorily, but also claim success biologically. I want to talk next about how much this plan will cost, and then we'll come around and have this same graphic once again, and we can talk, have a conversation about it. So how much did this cost? Next slide. So if we were doing this back in 2019, looking for cost estimates, we would have been in a much better situation. Since 2019 today, we've seen a cost increase of about 150% of the property values. So it's been a very expensive time right now to be doing this effort, but it's also probably realistic. So what we're going to give you today is the most realistic number as of 2022 dollars. So everything we're going to talk about is in 22 dollars. Next slide. So again, the 4 planning areas that we're going to talk about today, I'm going to focus again on the North County and South County MSCP and the pink MHCP for North County cities. Next slide. We've done a great job of acquisitions, and it makes me really happy to kind of pull this data together. We've had over 205 acquisitions since 1997, which is kind of the start of the first MSCP South approval, leading to conservation. So we were able to grab all those acquisitions that we could from the County of San Diego, from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, California Fish and Game, BLM, Sandag, and even Carlsbad, and put this into our database. And what you find out, next slide, is, we've done a great job in terms of acquisitions. We've acquired over 52,000 acres of property, total of $410 million towards conservation, which in today's dollars, if you're looking for a soundbite, that's equivalent to about $1 billion worth of land in today's dollar that has been acquired since 1997. So 1 billion of land conservation in today's dollars. You also see the average cost of acquisition in 2002 dollars, which we escalated using the Case-Shiller index. And it's kind of like a cost of inflation type of for land values. And it goes from a very high in the North County city areas of 269,000 to a low in the East County of about 10,000. And you'll see there's been a various number of properties have been acquired, but most of the acquisitions have been MSC South, which makes a lot of sense because that's where the refuge has been developed. That's where a lot of the fishing game reserves are at. And there's been a lot of acquisitions down there, but also a fair bit in the North County of San Diego for MSCP. I put down here the median cost as well, just so you have an idea. When you're talking about housing prices, a couple of very expensive properties can skew things out. And this shows you the median value, which is that 50 percentile, the average number of for the average property. So we're going through this, and Jim, we'll make this, it'll be posted, you'll be available to everybody, and we hope for more feedback both today and tomorrow, or this summer. When we looked at this data a little bit longer, we found something very interesting that occurred. Next slide. We broke it down by who was acquiring the property. When you see who acquires the property in which planning area, you find that Sandag really has paid a lot more money, almost a disproportionate amount of money for acquisitions compared to the county or the feds, state, or even Carlsbad. I can tell you the rationale. We kind of looked at this, scratched our heads, and realized that because we had to buy a property in the north coastal area for a lot of the mitigation for the I-5 and the double tracking up there, it skews the data up higher. And because we targeted properties that would have been, were some of them entitled properties like the Enterprises and the Otay Ranch properties down in Otay Mesa, it created more expensive than that. So you'll see that the average with Sandag is much higher than if you take Sandag out. Next slide. So we did a little comparison. We just said, oh, what if you took with Sandag and look at the average cost And what if you took it without sandagging and look at the average cost? And yes, certainly it drops down to much more reasonable levels without sanding in there. What I'm putting down here is a draft recommendation for discussion purposes today, kind of a rule, just a knee-jerk reaction we're looking for the group today, of a $200,000 per acre for any acquisitions in MHCP, $40,000 for MSP South, and $45,000 for MSP North. And by the way, that $38,000 in today's dollars that was in the 2009 North County plan for MSCP, that's real close to that $45,000 that we have here. Ours is slightly higher. So let's wrap this up and bring it all together. The one last thing I want to mention is we met with our ad hoc, we kind of provide some draft recommendations. Next slide. And the comment was, well, what if we did this like a more bands? Aren't there bands that are kind of acquisition bands? And there's some loose patterns. You can see the East County is about less than $10,000 an acre, in that dark green. And then right in the center part of the county, there's lands that are $30,000 or less per acre. And then you've got some outliers here, and then some very expensive property. So I don't know if there's actual bands that I would say, but there is some trends that are occurring. Our next step here will be to take and look at some of the data, additional data we can get in terms of using Zillow and looking at the acquisition properties under Zillow that have habitat. So lands under Zillow, maybe we can add them that have mitigation value or have large tracts of property to be acquisition. And that'll give us some more data points. But where we are at today, and looking for input, next slide, is we want to have our pulling this all together, next slide. So our working recommendation to this group for discussion over the summertime will be to say we need about 35,000 acres of property to claim success biologically and regulatorily under these 3 planning areas, deferring the MSCP East County to later. With that cost per acre, and I see an error up here that has the old numbers here, but we'll revise those. There's about $1.8 billion of acquisition cost that we need to account for in the various planning areas. And I say that MHCP cost per acre should be $200,000, not $175,000. So I'll leave this slide up and we can talk about where we go from here, but we're hoping 2 things happen this summer. One, we're going to post the shapefile we use for the target parcels and get feedback from people that actually know these properties much better than us, so that people can have their inputs and say, oh, you forgot this property, or you don't need to acquire this one because it's got some other kind of thing going on, things that we don't know about. We're also going to be looking for some kind of recommendation of, did we get it right in the certain realm of acquisition conservation? About 10% more for MHCP for acquisition, about 10 to 12% for MSCP South. Does that seem appropriate? Then we're also going to look at the cost per acre. We're going to try to get some more data to refine that. My gut instinct, telling you I've been doing this for the last 30 years, is these seem to be appropriate for a cost per acre. And while we're going to have more refined numbers in the future, I think for today's discussion purposes, this seems to be right. About $1.8 billion are necessary to complete the acquisitions in these 3 planning areas. So I know there's probably lots of assumptions we made, lots of errors, but today I'd like to have a discussion about that so we can chase things down, and also then have another conversation again in September on this and the thing that we haven't talked about yet, which is the management and monitoring. So with that, I'll turn back over to the chair to address any questions or hearing comments.
Oh, Leanne, you're on mute. Are you back? Or
I
well,
can probably go while Leanne gets there.
yeah, while she gets back, I think Susan, your hand was up first.
Okay, where to start? So the most obvious one thing is that you don't have the boundaries of North County and East County, correct?
Yeah.
So the county has revised their planning boundaries, which can easily be fixed, and those coverages are available.
But are they available to the public? That's what we're looking for, because we haven't got a copy of those. We need to get those from the county, but we haven't been able to have those.
Well, I mean, I have them, so they're public.
Okay.
Anyway, so we can revise those boundaries. Your map with the South County, looking at, the areas that are red, like some areas popped out that made a ton of sense to me, like the connection between Sequan and Hamul. That's an area that we've been highlighting pretty regularly as a problematic, from a preserve design. So I think, looking at that area, your methodology seems to be working to some degree. Because that, that pops out every time. And so, and one of the problems in that area is the parcel size. So some of those parcels, which maybe is another filter that you could think about, is that, in some places, the county or the jurisdiction, whatever jurisdiction it is, doesn't have a lot of, like, it's not going to work and come in through land use because it's a smaller parcel size than could, which also though makes it harder to acquire. And that's certainly true in that connection up through there. But so certainly some aspects of your methodology are working since it's highlighting some of those areas. I would need more time to, study the other areas that kind of popped up and whether those also match sort of our analysis. And we were looking at it more simply, like, where's there gaps in the reserve, right? Like, which areas haven't been built out? And then, but I think you could use that same methodology in the north and the east, because we do have the reserve design. So we know where we want the preserve, certainly in the north for sure. And to some extent, some preliminary work has been in the east. So I guess, the East County, we need to just have maybe a broader discussion, more generically about, is it ready and ripe to be included? But I think your methodology could work using the focus planning areas. And similarly with the north, we have a draft preserve generally drawn. I think the other factor that makes the north more complicated is that the tools that we've used in the south, relying on mitigation and development, aren't going to work. So the north might actually need more acquisition than the South County plan did, because this sounds backwards, but there's less habitat to impact. So there's less of a driver, maybe using, if we use similar mitigation ratios. So those are all things that we, if we could sit down with you and we could share, sort of where we're at and what we know about those things.
That'd be great. And Lauren, can you get the conservation slide, the one with the targets?
And then I don't, from a cost estimate, like, I don't know how you addressed like the state and federal grant money that went to local jurisdictions, and whether, properties that had to be bought at market value, or, whether that made the factor or not, but I mean, that's a reality, right? So, because a lot of those locally owned parcels were bought with grant money. So I don't know how, I don't know how you were categorizing, who bought what, but.
Lauren, can you go back one more? Let's go back to the one with the slide with the map that shows the red parcels. Yeah, we didn't.
No.
There we go.
Yeah.
Thank you. Good comments. That's why we hope to be working with people over the summertime to get those boundaries and ideas out there.
Yeah. So, if we could, like you said, it sounds like you were going to make this map usable, and then we could compare this map to sort of our analysis that we've been doing.
Okay.
And, just a matter of sitting down in front of a screen and, but like I said, that definitely that area in that connection between Hamul and Sequan is one. And I feel like the connection up, sort of by, I don't know, I guess it's sort of the top of Ramona, or I guess that's San Pasqual. I don't know, it's hard to tell. But anyway, I have maps that I could send you that we could line up with these maps. And I think looking at parcel size.
Okay. I think we might have lost Leanne. I'm not sure, but Michael?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. I've got a few questions. Good points that Susan made. When you're doing the MSCP or the MSCP North for the county, are you including the vernal pool HCP for the South County MSCP? And it's possible that there could be a butterfly HCP that's integrated into all of this. In the context of this discussion, is an HCP the same as the NCCP?
We just looked at the boundaries of the NCCP preserves that were adopted, including the adopted HCP vernal pool for the city of San Diego.
Oh, okay.
Which ones were private and need to be acquired. So just looking at private parcels that need to be acquired to make sure that the preserve design is adequate.
Okay. And then on the MHCP, where you showed over 100% acquisition. So if you're working from the MHCP plan area, and there's a bunch of sub area plans that haven't been adopted yet, Escondido, so on and so on and so on. How do you project that impacting that overall number?
So again, you just look at the preserve boundary that was adopted in the sub area plan. And you say, regardless of whether it was adopted as a sub-regional plan or not, there's properties that's conserved, already conserved, you can hear about them. And there's properties that are private. And those private properties, if they met our criteria and the methodology, we should target for acquisition, regardless of whether the city has adopted an NCCP or not.
Great. Okay. So I thought, but I just want to confirm that's good. A point that Susan made, there is a draft MSCP East plan. Definitely needs to be revised to reflect kind of present tense, but that would be a timely thing to actually update as part of this process, at least to give you some order of magnitude, because it's not like it's been for the last 20 years dead on the radar screen at the county. There's actually discussion and consideration, and we've learned a lot about what's needed out there and so on through STMMP, all the work that they've been doing. So that would be a worthwhile thing to dive into. Maybe in the context of that discussion you want to have on kind of the more refined level of smaller parcels and linkages, and what's realistic from land use, those sorts of things. Those two topics could be put together. And then on your acquisition numbers, those were all agency contributions. Do those subsume NGO acquisitions?
I don't know, Mike. That's a good question. I had that same thought in my mind. If the NGOs had a bunch of other acquisitions that weren't provided to us in that, we'd like to get those as well.
Okay, so you're going so you're kind of using the conserved lands database and that sort of thing?
We got acquisitions lists from the service and from the county of San Diego with names, so we know which names of the properties. We just don't know if their NGOs were involved or if there's additional properties acquired by the NGOs that are outside of those.
Gotcha.
So like, for example, Skyline, Michael, we have Skyline because we worked on that with you.
Yeah.
So we know that's in there.
Okay, so our stuff is probably subsumed by those other agencies.
Our grant funding is included, Michael. So, but I don't know, Kim, if you looked at that tab.
We can look at it.
I think I did. I mean, we can look at it, but I think I did.
There's nothing that popped out at me that was a big, we missed this.
Okay. And there's been some not insignificant military funding too, of course. And then I don't know if this is worth, it's an issue for us. I don't know if it's really an issue for your overall calculations, given the order of magnitude here, but there are transaction costs associated with every acquisition. And I have a feeling that an agency transaction cost is probably about 4 times what we have to do, simply because they have so much more internal costs and so on. Are those included in your calculations, or are they just not?
No, we did not include those. The reality we felt was that the acquisition costs, the acquisition for closing escrow, were going to be a very small component compared to the larger acquisition per acre cost. And that's just personal experience going back with all the acquisitions we've made in the past.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. Okay, that's it for me.
Okay, I think Jim and then Dave.
Okay, real quick, because I gotta do it 2:30. We have cumulative biological impacts to deal with in East County because of primarily the county's initiative to have renewable energy fulfill a large portion of the climate action plan requirements. Part of the East County's value is that it allows that to proceed. So I agree with the other comments that we can't leave this thing on the side. It's become more important with the passage of time. The second thing I was going to say is if we're going to be getting more land than was the original idea, I would hope we would finish the gaps in the covered species list. For example, Hermes, for example, Kino.
Yeah.
Has that been thought about?
No, I mean, the East County right now is a blank to us. We don't have any information about it. We need to work on that to fill that gaps in. And we didn't go the next step, which was if we acquired this additional land, how would that affect covered species?
Yeah. Because it seems like if you're going to be buying all that land, you might as well get something for it.
Good point. And remember, the exercise today is to get something. So when we're asked by the Sandag board how much is needed for habitat conservation to complete this regional funding, we have a number. So that's the purpose of this intent, not to look at specific parcels or acquisitions.
And what's the timing on this, Keith? Sorry, I didn't.
Yeah, so I'm glad you brought that up, Jim. You know, we'd been pushing to get this figured out in September with the idea that in November, there potentially would have been a quality of life, a citizens initiative that we might be asked by the board to come up with how much is needed for regional funding if it passed. I think most of you at least seen the newspaper today or heard the news that that citizens initiative may have not had enough ballots to make the November ballot. If that's the case, then we would be pushing to have this number sometime this next 6 months so that our board could get together and figure out what it wants to do in 2 years from now to make the 2024 ballot. So we had a strong push before this. Now we're going to have some more time to reprieve.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay, Dave.
I think most of the points have been made by either Susan or Michael on before, but also on Jim's, there are some key species that we do need to think about, Hermes certainly being one of them, and there's probably others, and that is probably worth having a separate conversation about. They just, because they weren't covered under MSCP, they may or may not get covered if we can get a butterflies HCP done, and it's kind of spanning multiple jurisdictions. So it's hard to predict how that will come together, but I think on the other hand, we've got a pretty good idea where a lot of these occur. And as Susan indicated, we kind of dropped out, I think anything less than 5 acres when we were doing the North County plan the first time around, just because it was going to be so hard to assemble little parcels into a meaningful patch. And I think we still have those challenges, so we can find bigger parcels that are easier to manage, that, you know, hopefully the costs go down. We want to focus on that. And I'm not sure how much some of the old plans really built in the biodiversity / climate change models. That's something that maybe needs to be dusted off and updated where we can. And I don't know if you've ever thought about this, and maybe we have the information, but when Orange County Transportation Authority was trying to do their plan to figure out how they fit in, they did a needs assessment. And it was actually pretty cool. They looked at all the habitat types that were conserved and were still at risk, or where to go, so they knew how they were contributing. And that information may be valuable, but it might be a little bit hampered in San Diego because all the updated veg mapping only went so far. You know, it only was kind of on the west side of the mountains. I'm not sure if we need that information. Maybe we have the expertise among some, you know, outstanding experts, certainly not me, but, you know, at USGS and elsewhere. I just think we need to have some conversation. I think you're on the right track in terms of the need. I'm just not quite sure we have everything we need to know on where do we target those dollars.
Good. And I think that's the question for us this summer is what information do we need to figure out what's the realm of acreage that we should be targeting for just saying, hey, when it comes to funding, we need X amount of billions or millions for habitat for acquisition.
Yeah, and well, again, the landscape's changed now. If we're going to have these mega fires and have to take into account how long it's going to take for that habitat to grow back, maybe the reserve assumptions on how much it was needed to persist, to have those species persist. Maybe we aimed low compared to what's going on with the fires right now.
All those are good points.
Okay, we've got two folks from the public. We've got Bob Leiter.
Yeah, let's see, let me turn off my, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I want to go back to the map that showed the target acreages for the, and the 4 tiers for the areas in the MSCP South and the MHCP. Because I want to raise one, first of all, I want to support Dave Mayer's comments recently regarding the impacts of climate change on the entire MSCP land configuration. I think we're going to see a lot of possible changes to the open space and the preserve design that will come out of what we're learning now about the impacts of climate change, from both changes in the fire regimes and also other aspects that a lot of climate scientists and biologists have been identifying. So I think that's important to consider, and it might affect the acreages that you're going to use here. But my other concern, putting on my old City of Chula Vista planning director hat, is that the category for green, as I understood what you said, Keith, is that acquisition tier relates to properties that are designated in local general plans as being protected as open space. Am I correct on that? Is that how you differentiate for from the other categories?
Right, so the designation comes from Sandag land use files, which has an
Okay.
open space and preserve category, which comes from the layers of the general plans.
Right. Okay. Well, my point is that city general plans, and I think the county general plan as well, in many cases designate areas as open space based on the assumption and based on the understanding that there will be adequate funding available over a period of time. Most general plans have at least a 20-year time frame, so it's more or less assumed that within a 20-year period, funding will be made available to purchase those lands from private parties. And if that's the case, and it may not be the case with all cities, but if that's the case in a particular city, then for you not to calculate the costs of those acreages that are shown in green as part of the overall acquisition cost for completing the MSCP preserves and the MHCP preserve, you may be seriously underestimating the cost of that. And what I'd recommend, because I don't know the answer, but I would recommend that you contact the planning directors of all the jurisdictions that are in those designations and ask them to confirm that their open space designation does or does not totally 100% preclude any future development. I think otherwise you may be underestimating the cost of the preserve acquisitions.
That's a good point, Bob. And I think going forward, that's what we're trying to do. Is utilizing this working group and all the experience on this working group, including those from the jurisdictions that are present, to find out how we got this right. What are we missing here? And so that's the idea here, is to introduce it today and work with the rest of the summer to figure out how to refine this.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, I think that was all the comments we have. Does anyone else have any other comments? And I don't know, Leanne is having microphone trouble, so.
So let me just wrap up, Kim, where we're headed on this then. So Kim's got another ad hoc meeting coming up for management monitoring, which again, there'll be more discussions about how we make an estimate for how much needs to be managed and biologically monitored. Then both these items will come back to the September EMP working group for additional discussion. I think we'll probably have more time than we had, which is good and bad. I'd hoped that we'd get some potential funding in November, but we'll have some more time, I believe, right now to refine these numbers over the next year. And then ultimately, hopefully, Senate board will be in a position of asking how much funding should we set aside for regional habitat conservation. So that's where we're going, big picture. In the interim, I'm going to have Kim figure out how to get these files to people, and hopefully in a way that people can easily see them on like a Google Earth or something, and get some input from the jurisdictions, from the nonprofits on additional acquisitions and additional changes that we need to make for that targeted acquisitions. So that's where we're headed.
And I just wanted to jump in. I just wanted to thank everybody who's already given me data and, has answered my requests, but really for the management and monitoring, I think I sent out a bunch of emails. So I think you guys still have till about July or June 17th. I had asked to get some of that data back. So really we can't really move forward until we get a lot of that data, but I did want to just say thank you for all of those who've already answered my emails and provided stuff. So thank you. Oh, Robert. Did I not see Robert's hand?
No, sorry, I turned the hand off, but I didn't unmute. Hey, no, thanks for sharing this, you guys. I think this was really interesting. I'm overwhelmed by it. I'm just looking at the conserved land as data against your maps as we go through and trying to look at where there needs to be reconciliation, I guess, with where we might have acquisitions, but it's precluded because of other land use now, where and whatnot. But I definitely to help think it forward if it's possible to help you guys, because I think this is an important step forward and we really need to do it. And it's exciting that we're getting to a point where we're considering ourselves getting close to completing acquisitions, but definitely it's a bit overwhelming, but it's an important thing to be thinking really, really hard about right now. So I'll try to help however I can, you guys.
Thank you. I think that's it, Keith. And in the absence of Leanne wrapping up here, I'm not sure if someone could adjourn the meeting.
You can adjourn the meeting, Kim.
I can adjourn the meeting. Okay. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. Our next rehab task force meeting will be Tuesday, September 13th from 1 to 3. And you guys will be reaching out to everyone to confirm your membership, primary and an alternate in August. And we'll be also reaching out to the group on the management and monitoring and acquisition, getting you all the information from this meeting and setting up future meetings. So thank you guys. And I will adjourn this meeting at 2:39 p.m. Thank you.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Leanne.